Wyoming Territory, 1886. The wind howled across dry grass and snow patches. But the sound that made Cullen O'Dale pull his horse to a stop was not the wind. It was a woman crying. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching over frozen earth. The cry came again, muffled, rough and low. He followed it to the back of a weather-beaten barn, boards gray with age and rotted in places. It looked abandoned, but someone had dragged a heavy iron plow in front of the door to keep it shut. Cullen set his jaw and heaved the plow aside. When the door creaked open, the stench of mildew and rust hit him first. Then he saw her sitting against a post, wrists chained to the beam above her head. Her dress was torn, her hair tangled, and her face bruised in the sharp light from outside. But her eyes, those wide, dark eyes, locked on him with disbelief. "Ma'am," he said gently, stepping in. "I'm not here to hurt you." She flinched when he reached for her chains. "Who are you?" she rasped. "Name's Cullen O'Dale. I was riding from Casper when I heard you cry out." She hesitated. "They left me here. Said I was too old to be useful." Cullen's eyes narrowed. "Who did?" "My husband's family," she said, voice shaking. "He died last year. They kept my land and locked me in here days ago. Claimed I had nothing left to offer. Said I was 34 and dried up." He looked at her again, fully this time. Her cheeks were hollowed from hunger, but she had the kind of presence that could not be dimmed by dirt or bruises. She looked proud even in chains. "Well, they are damn fools," Cullen muttered, drawing a blade from his belt. She blinked. "You do not even know me." He knelt beside her, working on the chain. "I know enough," he said. "You are exactly the age I want." She stared at him like he had gone mad. "You must be touched in the head." "No, ma'am," he said, eyes steady on hers. "Just tired of people tossing away good women like they are broken tools." She said nothing after that, but a tear rolled down her cheek. It took a few minutes to cut the rusted chain loose. When it snapped, she slumped into his arms before she could catch herself. "My name is Verena Gable," she whispered, voice nearly gone. "I have got you, Verena," he said softly, lifting her like she weighed nothing. "You are safe now." Cullen brought her to his camp outside town. It was little more than a tent and a fire ring, but it was warm and dry. He gave her the last of his jerky and made her tea with snowmelt and pine needles, then wrapped her in his spare coat. She sat quiet for a while, staring into the flames. "I had 2 children," she said finally. "Both died of fever. After that, my husband drank himself to death. His kin took our land and left me to rot." Cullen poured more tea into her tin cup. "I am sorry." She looked at him, really looked. "Why are you doing this?" He leaned back on his elbows, eyes on the sky above. "Because no one should be left to die in a barn over a number. You are a woman, not a worn-out boot." That made her laugh, short and bitter. "You talk like you are older than 30. 37, he said. "Old enough to know what matters." She studied his face for a long moment. "You are serious." "I am." She looked away, voice soft. "I do not know how to start over again." He nodded. "You do not have to know. You just have to let yourself try." The next day, Cullen rode out to the farm where Verena had lived. Her husband's brother, a greasy man named Elwin, stood on the porch, chewing tobacco and looking smug. "I came for her land deed," Cullen said flatly. Elwin laughed. "She does not own squat. She is just some barren widow." Cullen stepped forward. "She is still his wife. That land was hers as much as his. You leave it alone." Elwin spat. "Or what?" Cullen smiled without humor. "Or I bury you in your own root cellar." It was not a threat. It was a promise. 15 minutes later, Cullen rode back with the deed in his saddlebag. a rifle across his lap in case Elwyn got any bright ideas. That night, Verena sat on a log near the fire, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. "I do not know what to do with it," she said quietly, nodding toward the folded deed in Cullen's coat. "You do not have to decide tonight." She turned toward him, firelight catching the curve of her cheek. "Why are you being so kind to me?" He shrugged. "Because you are worth it." She looked down. "I am not sure I believe that." "I will believe it enough for both of us," he said. She smiled, small and unsure. But it was a smile. 3 days passed. The bruises on her face faded, and her voice grew stronger. They rode into town together, and Cullen bought her a warm coat and a pair of boots. When she protested, he said, "Let me do this, please." She took his hand when they walked out of the store. Surprised them both. That night, she sat close to the fire, her shoulder brushing his. The wind had died down, and snowflakes drifted quietly through the trees. "I never thought I would feel human again," she said. He turned toward her. "You are more than human, Verena. You are brave." She looked at him, eyes searching. "You really meant it? When you said, 'I am the age you want'?" He reached up, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I meant it with everything I am." She leaned in before she could change her mind. Their first kiss was slow, warm, and real, tasted like hope. When she pulled back, her lips trembling, she whispered, "I think I am falling in love with you." His hand stayed on her cheek. "Then we are even." She laughed softly, and this time it reached her eyes. She was not chained anymore. She was free, and she was wanted, and she was his. The snow had crusted overnight, brittle under Cullen's boots as he helped Verena into the saddle. She didn't need the help, not really, but she let his hands steady her anyway. Her shoulders still held that stiff caution, but the way she sat her horse had changed. Not proud yet, but no longer hollow. They rode in silence for a stretch, passing frozen cottonwoods that lined the creek. The wind was low today, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke from a cabin a few miles west. Verena broke the quiet first. "There's a root cellar behind the house. If it hasn't caved in, it'll have potatoes and jars I put up after harvest." "I'll dig it out," Cullen said. "We'll take what's ours." She glanced at him across her horse's withers. "You say ours like it's settled." He gave a slow nod. "I reckon it is, if you want it that way." She looked ahead again. "I'm not used to having say in anything." They reached the edge of her land by midday. The house leaned a little more than it had last winter, but the roof still held. Verena stepped down without help this time and crossed to the porch. Her gloved hand ghosted the doorframe. "I painted this cornflower blue once," she said. "Didn't last long in this wind." Cullen waited behind her, not crowding. She turned and handed him the key from her coat pocket. "I buried it under the porch when they started locking me in." Inside, the air was stale but not cold. The stove still stood in the corner, rusted shut but intact. A cracked plate rested on the table, the kind with painted violets around the rim. Verena took off her gloves and ran her fingers over the wood grain of the chair back. "They burned my letters. I used to write my sister in St. Joseph. I don't know if she's alive." Cullen kept his voice low. "We can find out. You write her again." She sat slowly, breath leaving her like she'd been holding it since autumn. "I'd like that." Outside, Cullen worked at the root cellar while she swept out the house. He unearthed a few jars of pickled beets, cloudy but sealed, and a sack of onions that had barely begun to sprout. When he brought them to the porch, she was hanging linens on a line she'd strung between the posts. "Looks like the land remembers you," he said. She dabbed her brow with her sleeve. "I never forgot it. Not once." He handed her the onions. "You thinking of staying?" She didn't answer right away. Then, I'm thinking of not running. That night, they sat at the kitchen table, a stew of potatoes and wild rabbit between them. The light flickered from a single oil lamp, shadows long and soft across the room. Verena reached for her cup. I was a schoolteacher before I married. In Kansas. Taught 27 children in a one-room shack. Cullen leaned back, surprised. You ever miss it? Every time I see a child's handwriting, which isn't often these days. We've got a widow in town taking in boarders. She's trying to start a school again. I could ask about it. She looked up at him. You'd do that. I'd do anything that puts that light back in your eyes. She set her spoon down. You talk like you've been alone a long while. I have, he said, but I never learned to make it feel like home. She tilted her head, voice almost a whisper. You think this could be? He didn't touch her, didn't reach, just met her eyes. I think it already is. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of something slow and certain. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft against the roof. Verena stood and crossed to his side of the table. I want to remember what it feels like to be warm. Cullen held out his hand. Then come closer. She took it. Her fingers were calloused, but steady, and they fit against his like they'd been waiting. Neither of them said anything else. They didn't need to. The fire in the hearth crackled low, and the world outside disappeared. By early March, the thaw had begun. Slow and quiet, the kind that softened the ground beneath your boots and made the air smell faintly of mud and pine. Verena stood at the edge of the field behind the house, her hands tucked into the pockets of the coat Cullen had bought her in town. The fur trim had gone a little rough at the cuffs, but it held warmth still. Cullen knelt beside the fence post a few yards ahead, working a new strand of wire into place. He'd been out since dawn, sleeves rolled, jaw set to the task. She watched the way his shoulders moved when he twisted the wire cutter, steady and sure, like he'd been building things his whole life. You ever get tired of fixing what others break? She asked, walking toward him. He looked up, squinting against the pale sun. Only when it doesn't stay fixed. She crouched beside him, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. I could help string that. I was waiting for you to offer, he said, handing her the coil. They worked without much talk, the rhythm easy between them. She held the wire taut while he nailed it down, the hammers thunk steady against the post. After a while, she wiped her brow with the back of her hand. This fence was my husband's pride. He'd walk it every Sunday like he was guarding a kingdom. Cullen paused, leaning against the post. And now, she glanced down the line of fresh wire. Now I think it's just a fence. Keeps coyotes out. Nothing more. He nodded once. Sometimes that's all something needs to be. They finished the last post by mid-afternoon. Verena dropped the coil and stretched her arms overhead, wincing. You all right? He asked. Muscles I forgot I had, she muttered, then added. But it feels good. They sat side by side on the edge of the porch, boots muddy, cheeks flushed from the work. Cullen passed her a strip of dried apple from his coat pocket. I was thinking, she said, chewing slowly, about planting flax this year. Not much grows well up here, but flax might. He raised an eyebrow. You planning to sell it? No, she said, brushing hair from her neck. I want to spin it, make linen. I used to weave on a small frame when I was younger. You planning to set up a loom? If I can find the parts. He leaned back on his elbows, looking at her. I'd like to see that. She tilted her head. You'd sit still long enough to watch weaving? For you, I'd sit through anything. That made her quiet, but it wasn't a silence born of discomfort. She reached for his hand, resting between them. Her thumb moved along the ridge of his knuckle. You ever think about what you'd be doing if you hadn't stopped that day? She asked. He looked down at their joined hands. I'd be riding toward nothing. Again. You always ride alone? I used to think it was safer that way. She looked up at him, eyes steady. And now? He ran his thumb across the back of her hand. Now I think I was just waiting on someone who'd look me in the eye and not flinch. She leaned in, forehead against his shoulder. He wrapped an arm around her, slow and careful, like every movement mattered. I've been thinking about the bedroom, she murmured. He tensed slightly. You want to change it? She shook her head. No, I want to share it. Cullen turned his face toward her, his breath tangling with hers. Verena, you sure? I'm sure of you. They didn't rush. That night, they moved together like the wind through pine, quiet but certain. No part of it new for the sake of novelty. Only new because it was theirs. In the morning, she woke before him. Sunlight poured through the east window, warming the quilt where his arm lay across her waist. She watched his chest rise and fall, the edge of sleep still soft on his brow. Outside, birds called from the budding branches. The land had remembered spring, and she had remembered what it meant to be wanted without condition. She pressed a kiss behind his ear and whispered, You're exactly the age I want, too. He didn't open his eyes, but his hand tightened gently around hers. The pasture fence held firm through the week's wind and thaw, and Verena paused by it now, a basket balanced on her hip, her boots sunk half an inch into the softening earth. She'd pulled up the first of the wild onions from the southern slope, the kind that grew sharp and sweet near the creek bend. Her hands smelled of soil and green shoots. Cullen came from the east ridge, rifle slung across his back, a pair of prairie hens tied by the feet. He raised them in greeting, then set them on the porch rail. You ever cooked these before? He asked, brushing dust from his sleeves. Verena adjusted the basket on her hip. Not since Missouri. We used to roast them with juniper sprigs. He nodded. I'll clean them if you want to show me how you did it. They brought the birds inside, and while Cullen worked the blade along the breastbone, Verena laid kindling in the stove. The scent of iron and ash rose as the heat caught. She cracked open the kitchen window for the draft. You ever think about building onto the place? He asked without looking up. She pulled a tin of salt from the shelf. What did you have in mind? Room for tools. Maybe a shed. Something with a door that locks from the inside, not the outside. Her hands slowed. We'd have to mill the wood. I know a man 2 valleys over. He trades in rough-cut pine. Verena leaned on the counter, watching him. You planning to stay long enough to put up walls? He met her eyes. I'm not going anywhere. She studied him a beat longer, then turned back to the stove. Then yes, let's build. That afternoon, they walked the property together, marking where a new structure might sit. The sun hung low, light slanting amber through pines that bordered the western edge. Your hands ever get tired? She asked, watching him hammer a stake into the ground. He stood, brushing his palm on his trousers. Only when I'm holding back. She arched a brow. And are you? He stepped closer, until the space between them hummed with unspoken things. Not anymore. She tilted her face to his, the breeze lifting the edge of her collar. Good. Later, as dusk settled, Verena brought out a sewing basket and began stitching a torn hem on Cullen's shirt. He sat beside her on the porch steps, sharpening his blade in slow, careful strokes. You were married before, she said, not as a question. He set the whetstone down. Once. We were young. Too proud to ask one another for anything real. Verena threaded the needle again. You think we're doing it different? I know we are. She nodded, gaze on her fingers. I don't know how to be soft all the time. You don't need to be. The sky deepened to violet. A barn owl called from far off. She finished the hem and folded the shirt gently, setting it on his knee. "I'd like to learn," she said. Cullen reached for her hand. "Then I'll learn with you." That night, they lay in the dark, the warmth between them not just of skin but of something quieter. The kind of closeness built not on need but trust. "You ever think we were meant to find each other?" she asked, voice low. "I don't think we were," he whispered. "I think we chose to." She turned toward him, pressing her cheek to his chest. "That means more." He wrapped his arms around her, the slow rhythm of his breath easing hers. Outside, the wind moved through the grass like a lullaby, and inside, nothing felt forgotten. Everything they were building was theirs. The loom came by wagon beneath a sky thick with spring clouds, each gray swell heavy with the promise of rain. Cullen had traded 2 rifle pelts and a week's labor cutting fence posts to get it from a settler widow near Lander. The frame was worn smooth at the handles, the wood darkened by years of use, but it was sturdy. Verena stood beside the barn as Cullen and the teamster unloaded the parts. She ran her hand along the armrest of the beater, her touch slow, reverent. "That's maple," she said. "Not many looms are made from it. This is a good one." Cullen wiped his brow with his sleeve. "The woman said it belonged to her mother. She wanted it to go to someone who'd keep it working." Verena turned to him, mouth parted in surprise. "You told her about me?" "I told her my wife was looking to make something lasting." The word settled between them. He hadn't used it before, and she hadn't stopped to wonder if it was true. She stepped close, dirt soft beneath her boots. "You mean that?" Cullen looked at her, brow furrowed as if confused she'd ask. "There's not a part of me that doesn't." She looked down, then back up, eyes bright. "Then help me set it up. I want my hands to remember what they used to know." They worked in the north room, where the window faced the cottonwoods and the light stayed even through the day. Cullen steadied the frame while Verena fitted the uprights, her fingers working with quiet certainty. She didn't speak until the treadles were in place. "When I was 16, my mother taught me to weave linen tablecloths. We never sold any, just gave them to brides in town. I used to think I'd have one of my own someday." Cullen knelt to tighten a bolt. "You'll have more than one now." She smiled, faint but sure. "I want to make one with your name stitched into the hem." He reached for her hand, stilling it. "Then I'll build the table for it." The clouds broke that night. Rain drummed soft on the roof, and the house smelled of damp earth and pine resin. They shared a pot of barley stew while the wind moved down from the hills. Verena pressed her bare feet to the warm stones near the stove, the hem of her shift brushing her ankles. "I wrote to my sister," she said. Cullen looked up from drying the tin bowls. "You send it?" "Yesterday morning. I left it with the blacksmith's boy. He's heading east with the mail team." "You think she'll answer?" "I don't know," she said. "But I hope she does. I'd like her to meet you." He crossed to her, drying cloth still in his hand. "What would you tell her about me?" "That you pulled me out of a grave and never asked for anything back." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "That's not true." She looked up. "No, I asked you to stay." She rose on her toes and kissed him, the taste of rain on her lips. "Then I'm asking you something now." He waited. "Will you marry me, Cullen O'Dale?" His eyes didn't widen, and his breath didn't hitch. He just nodded, quiet and sure, as if he'd known all along she'd ask first. "I will." They were married the following Sunday, under the cottonwoods at the edge of the pasture. The preacher from the mining camp wore a clean collar and read from a leather-bound book. Verena wore a green dress stitched from a bolt she'd saved since Missouri, and Cullen wore his father's coat, brushed and pressed. There were no flowers, only young grass and the smell of wet bark. The neighbors came with bread and preserves, and someone played a fiddle out of tune beneath the porch roof. Verena laughed until her ribs ached and danced barefoot in the dust until the sky turned lavender. That night, she and Cullen stood at the open window, hands joined on the sill. "I never thought I'd feel safe again," she whispered. "You built the safety yourself," he said. "I just stood beside it." She leaned into him. "No. You held it steady when my hands shook." In the months that followed, Verena taught 3 children from nearby homesteads how to read beneath the same cottonwoods where she'd taken her vows. Cullen built a table from fir planks and carved their initials into the underside. He left it unvarnished, just the way she liked. The loom clicked through the seasons, its rhythm steady as breath. Linen filled the trunk by the hearth, each fold a testament to hands that no longer trembled. When her sister's letter arrived in late summer, Verena wept without shame on the porch steps, the paper clutched in her hands. Cullen sat beside her, his arm resting across her back, not asking what the words said, just waiting the way he always did. Later, she read it aloud, her voice calm, her smile soft. "She's coming in spring." Cullen kissed her temple. "Then we'll build a room for her." Years passed. The fence held, the loom turned, and the land they'd reclaimed bore root vegetables, flax, and in time wheat. They passed evenings by the fire, not needing to speak, not needing to fill the quiet. Love didn't always come loud. Theirs came steady, and when the wind rose again each winter, Verena no longer feared it. She had hands that worked, a name stitched in linen, and a man beside her who had chosen her not in pity, not in rescue, but in honor, in love. She never asked again if she was wanted. She knew.